Let's go. What's up? What's going on? Tonight we're covering Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. And we're covering this because the movie, for one, the movie's coming out this summer, I think. What's up to Block Party out there, our homeboy? The movie's coming out this summer with Leo, directed by Martin Scorsese and Martin Scorsese. And it's got Bobby De Niro and Jesse Plemons in it. So I was gonna cover the book anyway, and so I thought this would be a good time to cover it because now they've come out with the trailer and everything. And shouts out to Adam out there who also sponsored the stream. So if you want to sponsor a stream, you can hit the links in the video description and channel description. So tonight we're covering Flowers of the Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. This is um this is an interesting book. I was really surprised by this book. So for one, I've had it for a while. Somebody gave it to me back when it was published in 2017. It's kind of it's a runaway bestseller and all that stuff. It's a National Book Award finalist. But I, I don't know, for various reasons, I never wanted to get into it. I never wanted to read it. And then I guess something sort of occurred in the old skull here, which made me want to cover this. And then we got the sponsor stream, and then the movie's coming out. So my question is whether the obviously there are going to be changes to the movie because the screenplay there has to be a screenplay with dialogue. And one thing about the book that I appreciated was that it's a nonfiction book. It's not really a novel. So before anybody gets on me about it, it's not a novel, bro. I know it's not a novel, but it reads like a novel. And it's a nonfiction book about this thing that I really did not know. I think probably most people don't know about this event that occurred in the early part of the 20th century. But I've got some books here that are going to tie into it. And spoilers, I'm not giving a review of the book. I'm going to try and do a deep analysis of the book. And my thesis for the book is basically this, that although all of the events are covered in the book, which I'm going to get into what happened, one thing that is and it brings out conspiratorial elements that were in the trial that occurred within the book and in real life. But one of the things that is not mentioned in the book, and this is my thesis for the book, is that, and hot take here, is that this book brings to light a kind of it's a theme and a kind of test subject that we've seen since the beginning, really since the founding of the country, where Native American land and Indian and the Indians and people are used as a testing ground for the shenanigans of the elites in a way that is still concealed. We still see this. Remember a couple years ago, or I guess it was a couple years ago now, with the thing that happened in Canada, the school, the events that came to light with the school in Canada, and they found the mass graves. Well, I think that and I'm sure anybody here would also say this, that surely this still goes on, and what's interesting is that this is the one thing that was actually in mainstream normie news at the time and is now pretty much forgotten about, except it's coming to light again with this book, publication of the book. There was another book published before this which dealt with the same subject. And of course, with Hollywood, making a film about it, so it'll come to light. But it becomes sort of a limited hangout because the book, to a certain extent, you can see that the author is trying to bring to light the fact that this occurs because of certain uh, e we'll say SJ aspects of it, and that is obviously a point in the book, and the movie is gonna expound upon that. So mark my words, the movie is going to take the SJ themes in the book and extrapolate that, and that's gonna be the focus. Whereas, um, but in actuality, this thing is a lot darker and continues to happen, and we see that sort of trickle out in the news from time to time. But, you know, the the way that the country was I mean, think about 1607 and the landing, and we have, in Jamestown, company comes and I'm not, like, offering judgments on it, I'm just saying the thing that happened. So, a company comes, a Virginia company, and takes over this place, and then it becomes it's a testing ground. It's a testing ground for the company that comes, for the people that come, and they have to sort of pass a certain number of tests in order to survive. And then that gets transferred over to the way that people were relocated in the country. So then you have them on these grounds, and then that is like the perfect testing ground for the elites who are doing their various shenanigans. This one is going to deal specifically with oil. Okay. And okay, says Dr. Phil. And so it's sort of a perfect case subject. And I thought the book was well done because it shows exactly what I think you or I would figure out from the beginning of the book, which is that the main villain in this, who and I'm gonna say who that is in a little bit, but the main villain and what they do is not it's like a small sliver of the story, and it actually comes out that there's this whole thing that's been happening, and it's the sort of MO for the, we'll say the power structure, the pyramidal structure, and they use greed is their sort of immediate MO, but it's a larger thing than that. And I think that that's one of the things that the book doesn't really hint on. But so what I'm going to do is just discuss what the book is about. I'm going to give kind of an overview of the narrative, go into the form and content of the book, how that will give us a paradigm, a view of the paradigm of the elites within the book, or at least the power structure, and then I'm going to tie in a couple of books that it's interesting that this book, which is if you haven't read this, I mean, this is a mammoth book, but this is a book called The Prize, and it's a mainstream. It's not a conspiratorial book. It's a mainstream, obviously mainstream. I mean, it's got major PBS series written across the top of the book, but it is pretty revelatory because of it's basically the story of and the history of how oil and the oil industry has come to dominate. It's one of the big cornerstones. And it has all the characters in it. And one thing that's interesting is this makes very little mention of what happens in this. However, there's another book that I have that does make mention of it. And so that's how I'd actually heard of these people. And the reason that somebody gave me the book in the first place, because I read this one in 2017, and that was before, Osage was published, but I was talking to somebody about it, and then they said, "Oh, I've read this book. Have you heard of this?" And they gave it to me, and I kinda lost interest in it. But now I'm sort of back to it, and that book is called House of Getty. This is an excellent book. This is by Russell Miller, and it's the story of Jean Paul Getty or Jean Paul Getty going into John Paul Getty, and then the Gettys, and then the kidnapping thing that happened, and it's the whole history of the Gettys and the takeover and the sort of start of the oil industry. But this one really does, in a few places, discuss what happens in Osage because Getty was involved in that. And what's really interesting is you may not have heard of this book. You may not have heard of this at all, and you may not have heard of the Osage Indians, but that's where Getty started his oil fortune, and that plays a major role in what happens in the history of these events. It's pretty dark. I knew that the book would be dark, but it is a lot darker than I thought it would be. So, shall I go into what the book is about? Because and look, spoilers, obviously, because I can't do an analysis without telling you what happens in the book. So I'm going to tell you what happens, and I'm sure you'll be fine anyway. But it is a page turner. It's a pretty good book, and again, I you can roll through this in about a day. Um, it's a pretty easy read. Um, so again, shouts out to Adam who dropped a super chat to semi sponsor this stream. And if you want me to cover a book, then I will do that. Just give me a list, and I've got those fire sale movie analyses on the work in the on the way in the works. Bunch of other stuff on the way, and just to plug what I'm going to do next. By the way, before I do anything else, the next one I'm going to cover is going to be Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest classic book, and I started rereading it today. The last time I read that book, I was 15. Now I've read tons of Ken Kesey related material, and I've talked about Tom Wolfe. I'll be doing the Tom Wolfe stream with our homeboy Maddie over there, talking about Bonfire of the Vanities, and I have a personal connection with Tom Wolfe, personal related connection with Tom Wolfe. And Tom Wolfe, of course, covers the Merry Pranksters and all that. But even just at the start of the book, it's interesting going back. Jay was just talking about how people don't read, and you really, you really do need to. It's you glean so much from going back and rereading these books, which I'm sure a lot of people have read in their youth, but you need to reread them as adults because there's so much. Even the start of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is so dark and so revelatory in a way that you would not have gotten as a ninth grader when you first read it. So it's clearly an MK Ultra book. Um, and and so it's like psychic driving and you and Cameron. So we're gonna get into that in the next one and maybe cover the film as well. Milos Forman, the film. So yes, if you want to support me, please drop. You can hit the super chat function there, or you can better yet, drop me some fat chats in the immediate links, which will get to me right away, and those really help out. Those are in the video description and channel description. So, Killers of the Flower Moon is the Osage murders and birth of the FBI. And this book ties into a lot of other things. Again, prerequisites that we've covered. We always talk about this, how all the books we read sort of lead on in this weird web to further books. So some of the things that it ties into, I just made a short list here at the beginning of the book. It ties into the Michael Mann film Public Enemies, because that's John Dillinger, and that's also about sort of the birth of the FBI, and we've covered Michael Mann with Heat 2, which is also being made into a film because we covered that last summer. Not because, but we covered that last summer. J. Edgar, the movie, the Clint Eastwood movie with Leo. Leo is in this movie, and also that movie obviously will play into that because it's the birth of the FBI, and that's a major part of this book. Devil in the White City, which I've got somewhere up there, which maybe I'll cover in the future. That's not really my favorite. I didn't. eh, Devil in the White City is about H. Holmes, and obviously there's two parallel narratives within the book, and one of them, in my opinion, can be sort of wholly done away with. The H. Holmes narrative in the book is fascinating, and it's about the Chicago Expo, but it's by Eric Larson, and it's a decent book. It's a decent read, but if I were to analyze it, I'd probably completely do away with one of them. Now, the point of that is that we have parallel narratives because the story is about how H. Holmes, the serial killer in Chicago, is leading a life parallel to all the people who are putting up the Chicago Expo. So, and we have this juxtaposition. We've got one group who is building something up, and the other group, who is H. Holmes, is tearing it down, right? Tearing down human life. So it's weird how the two are working together. And at this sort of founding of modernism and the industrialism of Chicago. So that's interesting. But that the way that that book functions kind of plays into the way that this book does. It's sort of the same. Um, Blood Meridian, because we get although this book is the Midwest or the prairies and all that, and Blood Meridian is the Wild West. They both sort of work in a contemporary way, and we do have a couple characters in this that remind me of Judge Holden, real life characters. And we, of course, we've done Blood Meridian. Last of the Mohicans, which is another Michael Mann film, sort of plays into this. House of Getty, which I just mentioned. Thunderheart, which is an underrated Val Kilmer it movie. Of course, that one's about the Dakotas, but the way that the tribes are treated and their situation with, of course, with the feds and that movie plays into this book. We've also got Natural Born Killers. Actually, I thought a lot about Natural Born Killers in this while reading this because there's a big element of kind of nativism in Natural Born Killers. And now that I think of it, Gangs of New York also plays into that, but in a different way, a different sort of even definition of the word nativism. But Natural Born Killers, sort of the aesthetic sort of plays into this. And I know that Scorsese is going to do the movie, and that's an Oliver Stone movie. And I'll be interested when I watch the movie because I'm sure that in a way, the aesthetic of Natural Born Killers and its kind of hallucinatory aspects would be better suited. Um, his directing style would be better suited for this movie in a way than Scorsese, because I have a feeling it's going to be it's going to be a slog through the film. Not that I'm not a fan of Scorsese. I mean, I like Scorsese as much as any other dude, but um, I don't. I think this one's going to be pushing a lot of things that are not really don't really apply in a way, or at least they misapply to the narrative of this movie. What else? There Will Be Blood. So probably the best. Thank you to Circle G, who says Thunderheart is extremely underrated. And who else just dropped a super chat? Yeah, Nico. Shouts out to Nico, who dropped a 4.99 super chat. Says I'll have a request soon. Thank you, Nico. So There Will Be Blood, which our friend David Patrick Harry watched for the first time on the plane back from the old country. Which I've seen that movie, and it's based on the is it Upton Sinclair? It's based on Oil, his book, and I've actually got a Sinclair. No, that's a Sinclair Lewis book that I've got on the way. Talking about it couldn't happen here. So I'll be interested to see what that book says. But it's basically a kind of weird fairy tale story about uh just, I guess, sort of the Rockefellers mixed with John Huston, like in a John Huston visage, through a P.T. Anderson camera is the way I would describe There Will Be Blood. It's actually a difficult movie to figure out because it's so chaotic and there's so much ellipsis in the movie. It's hard to it's kind of it takes multiple rewatchings, but that movie is is probably a very good prerequisite or a good prerequisite for understanding what this book is about. Okay, so now shall I tell you what the book is about? Okay, well, it's about the reign of terror and travelers in the mist. Okay, so here's what it's about. So in the early part of the 20th century, this is after this is in the 19th century, as the various tribes were being relocated in the United States. Okay, there was a group of there's one tribe called the Osage. You may not have heard of them. So the Osage were moved various times, and they had this huge swath of land, that apparently went from, I don't know, Colorado to wherever, and it was huge. So they kept being moved and relocated, in the Trail of Tears and all that stuff, right? Well, so what they ended up doing, and this is pretty clever, what they ended up doing was they said that they wanted a plot of land, which was this arid bit of desert, of rocky desert turf. And they said they wanted that because if they took that, nobody would ever take it away from them. They figured this place is so bad, this place is so terrible. Nobody's ever going to come and say you got to give this place back or we demand the rights. And what they got was actually they found that they were on top of a huge there was a bunch of oil underneath. So the rocky, shitty territory on top was just lying right on top of this gigantic, oil pool underneath. Huge, like enormous. And they knew that because one of the chiefs had spotted a rainbow shimmer on top of a lake. And then they went to a drinking well. It was just like a well, and they noticed like a sheen to it, and they kept seeing, little bits of oil, black gold, bubble up. And at the time when they got this, nobody really knew what this was, and that's part of the Getty story. That when Getty when Getty finally went over to the Middle East and was, scouting locations for where he could possibly find oil, all these wildcatters were everywhere. Um, that's how he made his deals at the beginning because the sheikhs that he made the deal with were like, "There's nothing here. Why do you want this desert?" And he had the foresight to say, well, and he learned from Oklahoma that this seems like prime territory for oil. So they knew there was something under it. So then when they drafted their, agreement with the US or whatever, they demanded that they would own everything under the land, like in perpetuity. Okay. So when they found their Texas tea, says Amtown, when they found their Texas tea, their black gold, their bubbling crude, and all the people started coming in, they were protected from having to give it up because they owned it in a US document, right? Now, the way that they got that the government and the various later corporate interests and the big what were to become the big oil people got around this was, and especially the just demonic characters really that got a hold of this, was they said that although this tribe owns all this oil, they weren't competent enough to be able to manage the money that they got from the speculation and from the oil deals and from the various auctions that they would hold. So, like somebody just said in the chat, in the early 1920s, so the book says, the Osage were the single richest group per capita. They say in the world. I don't think it's the world. It's in the United States, certainly though. Um, and they had tons of money. So they made a deal for like $400 million. They made like a ton of money, and there were just a couple thousand people there. And so they had all this money, and so then the motor car came, and they like each person owned like 11 cars, and they had all this money. They had like tons of money. But the way that the creeps got around it was they said these people weren't competent to manage their money. So the US government, Congress passed a law, and they said that people who made money on these deals would um have to have a guardian appointed by the government. So the guardians were all people that were in league. They were all in league with each other. Okay, this is it's a gigantic scam. It's a big, there's so much corruption involved. And as you would know, as you would think, right, that there's so much money involved that greed becomes the driving factor for all this stuff that happens. Now that's not the only thing that happens. So what happens is there's all this money, and Leo's character, as we're gonna see, this guy Ernest, I think Ernest Burkhart was this guy in real life who married one of the tribeswomen. Now the problem is that the money would go to the people in the tribe, and it was measured in blood. It was measured in blood, right? So which is interesting, because one of the themes that I picked up, or the motifs that I picked up in the book, is that what's interesting, and he doesn't state this, but this is my interpretation, is that the way that the Osage have to the way that they gain access to their money is according to the amount of Indian blood that they have in their family. So they have to have like 100% Indian blood in order to have this. So like this guy Burkhart, he can't have the money, right? Because he marries into the family. Um, and that mirrors the way that the blood of the earth, or the oil, is taken out of the ground, and so they're trading in a kind of figurative blood, if that makes sense. It's like in both instances, it's kind of a figurative blood. There's literal and there's figurative, but it's interesting how that works. And also, one other theme that it's obviously not mentioned in the book is the fact that these guys are literally dealing in the black goo. So this is the black goo. This is the story of the black goo. Now it's not the um, technocratic great reset era into the future, transhumanist Lucy with Scarlett Johansson black goo, but it is a kind of a proto black goo, because it's literally the black goo, and it's the blood. It's like the blood of the earth that they're mining out, and they're going to suck it dry. So these people are vampires, because they're going to suck all this dry, and then they're gonna suck all the everything dry from the tribe, and then they're gonna leave them. Okay. Now, I'm not like saying that it's bad to, put up oil derricks and take the oil. I mean, or anything about crushed dinobots or whatever and all that stuff. It doesn't even make mention of that. So that's pretty good. What I'm saying is the way that the power structure goes about doing this is pretty sick. So shouts out to Elias, who sends a $10 super chat, says, "What's up, Based? Another evening, another great stream. Let's go. Let's go." And on the wings of an angel, well, on the land, on the way, yeah, on here. I realized that Chad Kroger, who owns the grocery store, I guess that's terrible. That's a stupid joke. I'm sorry. Um, Buster sends me. Buster also sends me $10 Venmo. Shouts out to Buster's for sending me that $10 on Venmo. Says that he's a Redskin. It says Redskins fan. That's the Virginia team right there. And they're no longer that. But shouts out to Buster out there. Yes, please support me via Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, or wherever you can, or just by sharing the stream. So, I realized that Chaz Kroger singing voice is my regular talking voice. So somebody dropped that meme on Instagram, and I'll always watch Chaz Kroger memes, and it's that dude, and he's singing Chaz Kroger, and it's funny about Nickelback because I did not like them at the time. But now it's like in this kind of post-ironic world that we live in. I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'd go to the concert. What? I don't care. Because I want to see him sing, and the wings of an angel, watch as they all fly away. Yeah. That one was not as good as the first one. Ah. Shouts out to Amptown, who says, "What's a Dinobot? Should I know what that is? Am I not based now?" Yeah, you got to get yourself based, Amtown. The crushed Dinobots are apparently the things that existed in an unfathomable amount of time ago, and they led to they all got crushed, and then they turned into the black goo, and that's how we all run our Suzuki Samurais, is what they say. But I guess really, what is oil? I mean, I guess oil is the sort of blood of the earth. I don't mean that in some sort of Gaia sense. I just mean that it liquefies the core or whatever. I don't know. But what's important to note is that the way, again, that they take it out of the earth and that what they do with it after promising people a certain thing is sick. So what happens is, um, the families are not getting the money. They have all this money and then they end up losing all the money, or the money is going to other places and it's going to their guardians. So for instance, like let's say that the guardian says, okay, I'll run, don't worry about it. I'll run the auction, right? They're going to put up lot 50 here, which was the Getty lot. We'll put up lot 50, and then Getty comes along and he bids, let's say, $1 million for this small piece of land on Osage territory in Oklahoma. And so then he manages the money. So he's like, here you go. Here's $1,000. Here's your grip. Take your grip, right? Or whatever, you know. I'm just going to run away with the other part of this money, the other, millions or the other hundreds of thousands of dollars. Don't worry about it. You don't need to know a thing about it. So then what happens? This is the crux of the book to finally get to it. Okay, so spoiler. So what happens is people start showing up dead. And the first case that they find, this is weird because it kind of mirrors the Portland thing happening now. Um, the first case that they find is a woman who has been shot in the back of the head in a car. And they try to rule her, at first they try to rule her suicide. And they're like, well, we can't because, Hillary Crimpton MO says that when she was shot in the back of the head, in the front seat of the car, and she slumped forward, we can't get away with that. But then they go digging around in the skull, and they have part of this again is the story of the beginning of the FBI. So they have like sort of basic criminology, and they talk about the Pinkertons and the intelligence agencies. Or early intelligence agencies in the United States. Pinkerton is interesting because remember the Pinkerton agency, their symbol was the all-seeing eye, and their logo was "We never sleep." Right, that was their motto, and they sort of are one of the organizations that gives way and eventually kind of evolves into CIA. I mean, it's an MI6 thing, but they provide a kind of platform for that. So they do a sort of basic crime scene um, recon, and they can't, they're like, we don't know what happened here. And then they go digging around in her skull, and then they find out there's no bullet, and they figure that the bullet is, it's a small caliber bullet, and it's close range. And so then they're like, look, she's obviously been executed, but that's not the only thing. So then they start finding all these other people who end up dead, and all in all, a total of, I think, first they say 24, and then 27 people are murdered. They all end up dead in suspicious circumstances in this one place. And this is crazy because it's not like we're talking all of Oklahoma. It's not like we're talking, New York, or, even if this was in New York, it would be a big thing. Like all these people. I mean, that's now, right? This is like early 20th century, and this is in this one small place with this one particular tribe. So finally they get some, they try to hire these various investigators, and it's funny because it's not funny, but it's interesting because many of the investigators that they hire will later show up in the book, and anybody with any foresight or understanding of foreshadowing in a narrative knows that, and what's good is that this guy really did do the research and put it together like a novel. So we as the reader get the sense that, oh, this is foreshadowing. It's like Chekhov's gun. There's certain elements in the book where things show up and you're like, this is random because he hasn't mentioned it again in 5 pages. Here's 10 pages. Here's 100 pages have gone by. This is going to occur if this book is worth anything, it's going to occur at the end of the book. And it does. Things sort of come full circle and come back around. And these are characters. And what's really fascinating is that, these are real people. These are real life characters. So, um, so then, so they get these various people on it, and then finally they end up with this guy, and he is this guy who's going to be played by Jesse Plemons in the movie. I like him. I like everything he's in pretty much. He's really good. He was in Black Mirror. He was good in that. He's obviously good in Breaking Bad, right? Um, isn't that his name, Jesse Plemons? Or am I confusing him with Jesse? But it is something Plemons, right? And he's married to Kirsten Dunst. Anyway, that dude, he looks like Fat Damon's, meta Fat Damon. But that dude, I like him. Anyway, in real life, this dude was like pretty badass. He was a Texan and he was a real life Texas Ranger. His brothers were Texas Rangers. His dad was a warden of some jail, and he saw his first hanging was when he was a little kid, and that's kind of Chekhov's gun in the book because it's going to end up with him as a warden at Leavenworth, and he's going to supervise hangings, and it's all going to kind of come full circle. But anyway, he comes in and he starts to investigate, and then he joins the FBI. So there's like they become the FBI over the course of this investigation. Like they weren't the FBI before, and they weren't allowed to carry guns and all that stuff. Whatever. I don't give a I don't care about the lore. I just care about how it plays into this and how it's also interesting in terms of how they are pitted as the good guys against the crooked investigators, which is ironic in the book. But but what ends up happening is, shouts out to Digital Minefield out there, homeboy Matty, who drops 4.99 and says Pinkertons were also the gun thugs involved in the union busting, which bolsters the fact that the intelligence agencies have always worked for big capital. Great point. And actually, Matty has covered the union busting over his channel, Digital Minefield. The real Cooter Brown. He's an expert on all things union and union busting, and he's absolutely right. Remember, um, was it Smedley Butler? No, it wasn't Smedley Butler. Was it Smedley Butler? Who was it? Whose war is a racket? Oh gosh. Is that Smedley Butler? I'm having a brain moment. Um, yeah, we know that intelligence agencies work as, at least especially at their genesis in America, worked as the kind of enforcement arm to further the big corporate, right? And that oil is the big one. And so we see this weird nexus of all of these things coming together in this one story. Thank you, Maddie. Coming together in this one story. We see big oil, we see big government, we see big Fed, we see big money, and we see the kind of relocation programs that serve as one of the starting points and one of the big things that makes the country. I mean, they even talk about how the Osage were regaled and lauded by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, right over there from VA. And when they met with Jefferson, they were in full regalia, dirt nasty regalia. They were in full regalia. And Jefferson said his quote was something like, I am your father and you are my people. And then they ended up being, moved. But that serves as a kind of platform for mass migration and mass movement of people through government and corporations that we're still seeing today. Hello? So so anyway, he starts to investigate And then this guy, White, he starts to investigate and he realizes that he's being followed. And there's this big element of gang stalking that occurs in the book. They don't call it that, but that's what it is because people in the town notice that, like, they'll hear something outside their door. They go outside and they'll see a shadowy figure just standing there. You know that when you're sitting on top of an oil field and you have all the rights to it, and they appoint a guardian who cares about you, right? And and then you walk outside and then, everybody gets electricity, and the whole town starts lighting up light bulbs, and you in their houses, and they didn't have those before because they didn't, they weren't around. And then you ask the town, like, "Why do you have these? Isn't it great to have electricity?" And they're like, "No, we have this because there are people lurking outside. There's lurkers all around, and we need to light up the territory." That's the only reason they have it, for protection. And you walk outside, and there's a street light, and there's some dude who's standing halfway in the light and halfway in the darkness, and he's just standing there staring at you. Um, and then, like, dead animals start showing up on your front doorstep with no messages. Things are not good, right? Things are not good. So that's what occurs in the book. And so the guy starts investigating and he finds that this one guy's been poisoned. This other lady's been shot. This person's been shot. This person's been shot. Somebody was thrown off a train. Somebody was run over. And they're all members of this town. And then guess who gets involved in this? This is one of the things that came out in the book in 2017 that the author did not probably didn't even know, and if you wouldn't ask him, but if you asked him, he probably would not have an understanding that he wrote this himself because that's often the case with authors when we're reading literature, right? But guess who gets involved in this and plays a major role? The frontline heroes that we've seen over the past few years play a major role in the liquidation of the Osage tribe, because it turns out that one of the ladies who owns the rights, um, she goes to the doctor and she finds out that she has insulin. And I mean that she needs insulin. She has diabetes. She's got to. Oh, what's your favorite sweets? My favorite sweets is I don't like sweets. I have diabetes. She has diabetes. It's not funny. She has diabetes, and or at least they tell her that. And so they appoint some frontline heroes to come and administer insulin to her. Well, it turns out she is not getting well. In fact, she's getting worse. Oh, well, nice pun there, right? Because the oil well, sorry. So she's not getting well. She's not getting better. She's keep getting worse. And then later on, when they have independent frontline people come and check on her, they say, no, it turns out she's been being poisoned over a number of years. And who's been poisoning her? Well, all the people, this guy, the author actually, he plays a weird role in the book because in part three of the book, he is himself is in the narrative. So it's almost like a straight form of gonzo journalism, a little bit. I know that's a kind of a tenuous connection, but he is inserted into the narrative because he actually uncovers something himself, so he's a character in the book. But in the first 2 parts, they keep talking about how anybody who comes to visit them, um, when they have, like, for instance, if they have liquor at the house, they'll always say, "Don't drink that." Or if they've gotten food delivered or whatever, they're like, "Don't eat that. Don't eat that." Uh, Miss Marple up the street delivered that food to us. Very nice lady, but don't eat it. Well, because they are highly aware that their people are being eliminated and that some of them are being poisoned. So then it turns out, how is the poison being administered? Through the stabbies. The lady gets daily stabbies. A bunch of them get daily stabbies, and the people, it turns out, are apparently are all involved. They're all paid off, and they're all involved in this because there's so much money, and there's so much deviancy, and there's so much demonic shit going on. Excuse my language, folks. There's so much demonic stuff happening in this one place that all of these people are involved in it. So I know that, there's the banality of evil and all that stuff in the book, and talking about the events in Europe. But this book um really does kind of put a weird spin on that because these people were seen as perfectly normal people who came to be involved in the lives of this tribe and who were doing these nasty, terrible things. Now, the problem though is that they're actually not normal people. They just go under the guise of normal people, right? It's almost like these are these are demons wearing skin suits, right? This is a family audience. It's not, but yeah, but you know, we got to watch out for the affiliates. So so then what happens is basically the guy uncovers he has an informant named something Morrison, and this guy's like a dope peddler. This guy's a snitch or whatever, and he snitches and he says he gives names. Well, it turns out that he's a double agent, and he is giving fake names to the investigators, and then going and telling somebody else who they're investigating. So there is a certain group or there's a certain person who runs a kind of a shady organization, who has his finger in every pie, as Peter Griffin would say. And there are also ritual aspects to this. The guy is a Mason, and it's pretty clear to see. Maybe it's just the way that the novels, I mean, the this nonfiction work that reads like a novel is structured. I think if any of you read the book, you would figure out who the bad guy is, pretty early on, because of course it's going to be the guy that is the most vocal, has the most to do with the town, runs the most charity. You know, he runs the huge charity organizations in the town, and he is somehow benevolent over this group of people. Right? So shady right away. And one thing that's interesting is that the author, when he went to Osage to first start like investigating the story that he heard, he talks about how he sees this big picture. Okay. He goes to the museum, the Osage Museum, and he sees this big picture. And there's actually a copy of it here. So there's this uh there's this gigantic there's this gigantic picture, and it looks like tons of people. Now, this is like this is like the entire Osage tribe all together, right? And you see all the people, right? You see this like scan full of people, and you also have all these people who have interest in the oil, what becomes the oil industry there. But you notice over here on the left side of the page, over here, there's like a blank spot. It's on the very edge of the page. And so when he's looking at that in real life, he says, "What's this? Is this a mistake in the photograph?" And they say, "No, that's not. In fact, we didn't know that the devil was standing amongst us at the time." And which is pretty, ooh, give you some chills up your spine. Well, this is the guy who I'm gonna talk about, one of the people who's responsible for the crux of the novel, and as it turns out, there's something way bigger, or the book. I'm gonna just call it the novel from now on because it reads like a novel, so I don't have to keep correcting myself. And what they did was when they found that picture in the museum, they went back and somebody cut him out of the picture. And then they still have it in their archives. And then they brought out the picture and they said, "This is the guy right here." So he's standing right on the edge of all these people. And this is the guy. He's right there in the picture. And it's really creepy because even the fact that they cut him out of the picture makes it look like he's a ghost. It's like he's a hollow man. He's this guy who is a complete sociopath who is totally empty and does all these things, but has this veneer. Now, it's so funny sometimes reading books like this because I feel like any person who's watching this right now is clued in enough to know that if you were there and you like somehow, let's say you're a consultant, right? Or you live in the town and they asked you who was the culprit, um, you would hear this guy talk for 5 seconds and you would know that it was him because he just has that everything that he says has this air of it's just fakery. It's just fakery and mimicry and lies. And what's crazy is okay, so I'll get to that. So anyway, what the investigators find out is that through the guardianship, all of the thing that binds all the victims together is that they are all somehow tied to this one guy who, through a series of fronts and through a series of human fronts. They're not just corporate or company fronts. These are people. So, for instance, like there are people that he gets and he hires them and they marry members of this tribe. And then he gets the rights to their children's trust signed over to him through the insurance. So there's like layers and layers and layers where they have to find this stuff. And it's just not clear like what it, I mean, it really took digging to figure out like how this was working. And nobody would snitch on the guy because he was like he's just like a devil man. So it turns out it's this guy, William Hale. And Hale is the guy who, again, spoiler, this guy is going to be played by De Niro in the movie. And this guy is a cattle baron. Um, he sort of starts, I don't know, he's not really a wildcatter, but he's a cattle baron. He is he's deputized. He's a part-time deputy. He like starts all these charitable organizations. He's got ties to New York. He's got ties to big money. He's got ties to oil. And it's all hidden under layers and layers, not even of paperwork, but through handshakes. And there are all these red herrings because the problem with this, it's like this guy was devilish enough to know that if this happened in a city, if this happened in New York, for instance, right? Well, all the people that you would be in that this guy would be involved with through, corporations and they all end up being eliminated, well, they would all have ties to companies, right? I mean, if this were to happen now, this obviously does this, I'm sure this happens now. Okay. Um, but it's like, oh, would the with the pings on the cell phone towers track them with the, social media posts and all that kind of like first layer of investigation and looking at this stuff, I'm sure. Right. But the problem is that in this, everything's word of mouth and they're surrounded in this totally wild territory where all these other characters are. And so they provide perfect cover. So for example, um, like they'll be like, "Okay, who do you think did the gunshot?" Well, we arrested this guy over in the town over, and a bunch of people saw him in town that night, and he was drunk, and then he was hanging out with that girl, and he's the last person to see her. And so then they're like, "Oh, well, it's him." And they're like, "Okay, we'll go and question him." And also the guy's got a rap sheet because he murdered somebody, but then he gets acquitted, for something in a bar fight, right? And this is like extension of Wild West territory, right, in terms of time, but this is like going into the 20th century where it's amazing how wild it still was, right? So it's crazy because the time we get this time that ties up between the founding of the country, right, and the initial exploration and then the founding of the country in Virginia and Thomas Jefferson, and then the Louisiana Purchase, and then we get the drive west and we get Lewis and Clark and then we get Andrew Jackson and we get all of these various things. It's like all of those things happen over a long period of time, generations. Not a long period of time in terms of like a European, viewpoint, obviously. But if you were looking at it in terms of like looking back now, it's like, well, this happened in the 20s and they're talking about the 1860s here, and then this is 1810 and then 1607. So it happens over generations. But that is part of what caused this. That's part of the how many books have we seen this in, and how many things have we seen this in? This is like it's a generational thing. It's a long con. It's a long plan. One of the other things that's interesting is that I would tie that into, for instance, Melville's Confidence Man. It's a cavalcade of characters who are ne'er-do-wells, rakes, um, provocateurs, renegades, desperados, and they all converge on this one thing. They even talk about the great land grab, and they remember in Far and Away with Tom Coombe where they're lined up on the prairie and they like shoot the gun and then they all got to go off and get their land. That's tied into this. So all of these people are involved in this one place in the United States, and of course, it's like a magnet. It's a magnet for tons of good people. It's a magnet for kind of neutral people. It's a magnet for the worst people. But there's like levels of the worst people. And so this guy Hale figures out that he can use this as a smokescreen, as a mirage for his own shenanigans because he's also deputized. So he can also go, hey, no, it was that guy over there. But it's even worse than that because what happens this is crazy. So one of the things that really blew my mind was that um one day the guy gets sent to a house, and the house is this big mansion in town, and the house of this Osage family has blown up. And there are a bunch of people dead inside, right? So they're like, "Oh, it's a house fire." Well, it blew up. There were witnesses who at least said that no, the house blew up. So now we have to wonder, like, who has access to explosives? Well, we're in the kind of it's not the Wild West, but for all intents and purposes, it's the Wild West. So all these people are involved. Who has access to explosives? Who could pull off this thing? Because it looks like there's not only one assassin working, but there are multiple assassins working. Because again, we've got different methods of death at various times in various locations that all seem to have a different signature. We've got people shot in the head. We got people stabbed, people thrown off trains, people who get run over, people whose houses get blown up. And then it turns out that one of the guys snitches on some other guy, but he can't be the culprit because he's locked up. Oh, man. Guess what happened? Well, because Hale is a deputy, what he does is he makes an offer to this guy who says, he says, "Look, I need you to blow up this house with these people in it." Okay. And the reason he does that is because the investigators figure out that the life insurance policy and the way the trust works says that if one of the adults gets killed, they won't inherit the money. Both of the adults have to be killed at the same time. It has to be some sort of act or some sort of thing where they both die unexpectedly. So when the house blows up, both of them are supposed to be there. Now that doesn't work because the father isn't there or the dad, the husband isn't there. But still, it's an incredible amount of money and it's going to go to him. But what's even worse than that, do you see how this is like layers of worse and worse and worse? What we figure out is that um, Ernest Burkhart, who is this seemingly good husband, he's a Leo character, and it's going to be a Leo character in the movie. Um, that he was supposed to be there, and he was supposed to have his children at the house. So, at the behest of Hale, who becomes increasingly this H. Holmes serial killer slash like almost Chaz Manson level, or at least what we read about Chaz Manson level guru mind control guy convinces him that you need to blow up this house with your whole family in it because the guy's married to an Osage and all the money's going to go to Hale. And he's got these dark hypnotic eyes that work over everybody. And that, like we see with a lot of these psychopaths, that you remember the David Icke clip where he's talking about the prime minister, um, Ted Heath, and he says, "I was backstage, and I looked, and I turned, and in front of my very eyes, he turned into his. He looked at me like he was scanning me. His eyes went completely black, and he was scanning me. And in front of my eyes, he turned into an 8-foot reptile." Remember, he says that. But there, you know, if that's literal or figurative, right? If it's figurative, I mean, these people are demon people, and certainly they do have some sort of snake-like characteristics and MO that is seductive, like the serpent in the garden, right? Where they are able to get people to do their bidding so that they can sort of become their own gods, but all for his destruction and inversion of the natural order of things. And this guy is so sick. So the way that they blow up the house is he tells the guy, "Well, I have access to nitroglycerin, and all you got to do is light this fuse." And Hale shows him how to light the fuse. He says, "You go up under the house into the crawl space." Remember, because there were people always creeping around their houses and lurking. You go up in the crawl space. You put it under, whatever, I don't know, the gas tanks or whatever under the house. You put the nitroglycerin in there, and then they would light the fuse, and then you peace out, and it'll blow up. So remember the guy was in jail, so he couldn't have been the culprit, right? Well, it turns out that while he was in jail, Hale went to visit he had been visiting the guy because the guy gets locked up in the meantime, even though he'd offered him this assassin job or whatever. So Hale goes and says, "I can make this whole case go away, or at least I can lessen your your sentence if you just do this one thing." And the guy's like, "All right." So he goes, he gets him in jail. He takes him out of the jail because he's a deputy. He says, "We need to take him to some, he's got to make a deposition or whatever." He takes him out of the jail. He drops him off. The guy does the bombing. Then he takes him back in the jail and he gets him back in, and the guy's there. So he can't have done it because to the investigators going to look into it, the guy's locked up. They don't question, were you here in the jail that night? They don't even think to look into that. It's kind of like that Gerard Butler, remember the Jerry Butler movie? Where Gerard Butler works for DARPA and he actually makes his way into the prison so that he can commit these crimes of revenge against the scumbags that killed his family, right? So anyway, then it goes even further into part 2, which is like the criminal case. And in the criminal case, there are so many I mean, there are witnesses that are being knocked off. There are judges that are paid off. They talk about what's the guy's name? What's the famous lawyer? Clarence Darrow gets in trouble because he tries to buy off a jury. And so there's just corruption everywhere. And what's interesting about this is that the book tries to frame this or tries to say that this is because of who the victims were. And that's certainly, yeah, law-abiding citizen. Um, and that's certainly the case in one aspect. But the other aspect is that this provides a framework and a paradigm for what these people continue to do. And it was because of the eugenics aspect, the human experimentation, the psyops, the money, big oil, big frontline heroes, big government, big land rights. It all converges on this one thing. And it's like the people in the press, because big press is involved, they just further the propaganda and the people just don't care until finally it comes to such a it gets so bad that they finally put the guy on trial and they get Ernest Burkhart to testify against I was a mook, right? He has to testify against Hale, and so he ends up like, uh, he turns state's evidence or whatever, and Hale goes to jail. But then it gets, I mean, look, this doesn't stop. So it gets even crazier than that because once Hale is in prison, and remember, he was the mastermind behind all the events. It turns out that first of all, Burkhart's wife learns at the trial that her husband is part of this ring. And so like there's this part about like where Burkhart says looks at his wife and he smiles because now he's told the truth and he's free because he's told the truth. But she looks at him with a blank stare, like, no shit, dude. Of course. You think that's gonna set you free just because you told the truth about this one thing? You still did it, right? So she goes on to marry somebody else, but still suffers from her health and she dies, fairly young. And Hale goes to prison, but when he's in prison, he's writing letters to the tribe. And I mean, this is true psychopathy. He's writing letters to the tribe. This is like Albert Fish or something, right? That guy was a real jerk. Um, and he's writing letters to the tribe saying, you all have been, like my children, just like Thomas Jefferson said about them originally, right? And I can't wait to get back there because Osage is my home, and we can rebuild the town. It's like you killed off a significant portion of the entire population of these people, and they'll never forget it. What are you talking about? But guess what? He gets out in 20 years, and then Burkhart, the guy who turned state's evidence, he goes and he gets in trouble for breaking into somebody's house. He goes to jail. Then he gets pardoned by the governor. And so it's like it by the way, all the money that the Osage have from the oil, and they had a huge amount of money. But remember, they didn't have access to it because of the Guardians, and that was approved by Congress. So then they have to reverse that, and they have to look at it and go, okay, maybe this is bad, right? Well, it turns out they don't get, they get a fraction of the money that, the Gettys and all these people are getting, of course. And then it turns out that the Great Depression is right on the heels of this. So all the oil money, all the money, like the price of oil drops, it goes into precipitous decline, and then the oil is not worth that much, and then it's more trouble to try and get the oil out of the ground than it is to go elsewhere. So then and then the oil itself dries up. And then when the oil like starts drying up, turn to the contemporary now era now. And when this journalist, the guy who wrote the book, goes and visits the town, he sees that they put up windmill farms on top of the oil territory. So then the tribe has to fight against the windmill farms, and they're like, "You can't do this without our permission. We own the land." And then, of course, Big Wind says, "Well, actually, we're not mining because everything's above ground," which I guess is technically true. So we don't owe you anything. So now they can't get any oil, any oil that's left underground. They can't get it because the wind farms are there, and because the companies don't want to get it, go in and get the oil when the wind farm is there because it's in the way. And then, okay, so here's the last thing that happens. I know this is a crazy story. I'm just trying to summarize the events in the story. Okay. Before I get into some of the things in the book that are revelatory in terms of the text. By the way, please like and share. Please send me those. Send me those. Any kind of donation or hit that like or whatever if you like my work here. I really appreciate it. I'll give you some shouts out here. Yeah, big wind is crazy. Um, so the last thing that happens in the book, which is what puts the whole book in perspective, is when the guy goes back in part 3 and he talks to the descendants of these people, because it seems nobody goes and cares about talking to them, right? Um, he goes and he talks to them and they say, "Oh no, um, yeah, that guy was bad, right? But that's not even the worst part. So you think that 27 people were murdered here. Well, actually, when you go down in the archives and you look at the surrounding events before and after this, you'll see that this was an entire program and that so many people had their hands in this. So many people had their claws in this thing. He finds out that the death toll is actually in first he says the scores and then it turns into the hundreds, hundreds of people were eliminated through this thing. Now, part of this is that he can't prove that every single one of these cases was a an assassination or an elimination. But he says, for instance, like look, the death toll in terms of any small community in this country is such and such percentage, right? Let's say it's like 1% or whatever, when you combine the births and the living people and the certain ages and, the people that die unexpectedly. Well, this is like over 20% who are dying violent deaths, right? And again, this is like people thrown from trains, people run over, poisoned, shot, stabbed, beaten, all this stuff. And it's all in this one place. It's not like greater Oklahoma. It's just in this one place where this tribe owns this territory, right? So so he goes and he's like, "Who did this? Who did this?" So he goes into the archives and he goes into the archives at the like Oklahoma City government building. Weird place to go. I guess it was after those things were also eliminated. Maybe speculation. Maybe there were some things in a certain building that also contained evidence and that people wanted to get rid of. Right. Well, he goes into the archives or what's left of them, and he starts searching through, and he finds like court records and court documents and interviews and all this stuff that nobody paid attention to. And then in one place, he finds that an informant had named this one guy. This one guy's name appeared, right? And then it was retracted. So he's like, "That's weird. Why would the guy retract his name?" Okay, so there's something to that. And then he comes through, I don't know how much paperwork he comes through as part of this, but he finds that the guy's name, he finds his name appear in 3 places. They're all separate places, but he says that that's enough of a thread. So then he goes into research about this guy, and it turns out that this one dude is a what do you think he does for a living? What is this guy? What is the guy who's even he escapes justice when Hale, the cattle baron, who's a big deal and tied in with the oil people, but this guy is on a whole other level. What do you think this guy did for a living? Well, he's a banker. He he starts a bank. He owns he starts writing paperwork and making loans to the people in the tribe. The loans are like guaranteed by him, and it all ties back to him or whatever. And he's loaning people he's practicing, USURY on just an unfathomable scale, right? So he loans them, I don't know. I don't know. He loans them $500, right? And they end up paying him back like $500,000. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, folks. Well, on the wings of an angel, watch as they all fly away. Look, can I? Sorry. Yes. So he was a banker, and it turns out that this guy was like the guarantor of all these loans. He made all these loans. He had finagled his way into the insurance policies, and even the government was like, we've never seen paperwork like this. Is this what is this? Is this legit? And he's like, oh no, it's legit. Don't you know me? I'm William J. Banker. And they're like, okay, good enough. And he totally escapes. By the way, the guy that was thrown off the train was this gigantic guy, and this guy was a big guy, and he was on the very same train at the very same time. They got on at the same time, and then the guy got off alone or whatever. So, and he totally escaped. So, my point is that this one book and this one tribe is a clear example, even in National Book Award finalist, New York Times bestseller, completely legit normie territory. It is one example of a proven um uh spirity involving these elements. And the amount of corruption that's stated is just unreal. I mean, it's unreal. You usually you don't really get this in books like this. And also that again, that's my thesis. That's not even his thing in the book. He's just pointing out sort of on a lower level certain things that happen. I mean, he wrote the book and he's pointing out these lower level events and the ties that bind and that there's a conspiracy. But this to me, I guess to probably to any of you would just be a clear example of it's not just here, obviously, that this occurs. Now, the reservations seem to me to be the play they seem to me to exist. One of the reasons that they exist is because it allows this sort of thing to happen. And I'm not saying that that's why they were started. I'm saying that's what they have um come to be, right? I mean, it's like just a free for all. It's just a free for all for these sick, demented people. So, um, so now I'll go into some of the parts of the text that sort of illustrate what I've just said about all this stuff. Here's a picture of Hale. I mean, look at this guy. You look at this guy. Look at this guy. So I guess to everybody else, this guy just looked like, oh, that's just Mr. John Do Gooder, right? I look at this guy and I'm like, this guy looks, I bet you when you saw this guy in public, he had black marble eyes reflecting the black goo that he was taking out of the ground and his demonic energy. And this guy was all about this. And he made no bones about telling you. Now, for one giveaway, by the way, is that when he is pointed out as a possible suspect, what does he do? He willingly goes in without his lawyer and he starts running his mouth and babbling about how he couldn't be the guy and he's a great guy, which always seems to be the MO, right? It's like, he gives no like he expresses no repugnance or horror at any of the events that happen. And what's crazy is that even in the court documents, when they question some of the assassins that they find, um, and remember earlier I was talking about how this provided a cover and a red herring. Well, this guy was so manipulative and so clever and had so much guile that he knew that the Osage Territory and Oklahoma in the 1920s would provide a cover because all the desperados who were there. So they'll be the they'll be a perfect red herring. It's that guy. He's over there. He did it. But he goes further than that because he actually does end up recruiting them. So it's like that's the guy who did it. Everybody's gonna point to them, they're gonna look away from him, and then on the back end, he gets those very people to do his crimes. And one of the guys who admits to shooting the woman, they say, "What did you do that morning?" And he's like, "Well, I got up and I had breakfast. I met with Hale. Somebody gave me the gun. I went and they showed me the spot. They got the girl in the car. He got in the car. He smoked her. And then they're like, what was it like when you did it?" And he was like, "Well, I put the gun there and I pulled the trigger and I smoked her." And then they're like, "Well, what'd you do after that? And he's like, well, they gave me a ride back to my house and I went home and I had a nice lunch. Then I took a nap. I mean, these are sick people, right? What a jerk. That guy was a real jerk. So, um, page 77 and page 62 both talk about this guy described as the devil, and they talk about Pinkerton. So I'm gonna mention Pinkertons here. It says one of the guys that they first got as a possible investigator was this gigantic guy who reminded me of Frank Hassel. This guy's good at hassling people, right? This guy employs the hassle doctrine, and he's this huge sort of Judge Holden character who everybody's afraid of. That guy sort of ends up playing a role, but he ends up being a Pinkerton. And what they say about the Pinkertons is they say from the outset, the fascination with private detectives was mixed with aversion. This is in the 1920s. They were untrained and unregulated, often had criminal records themselves. Beholden to paying clients, they were widely seen as surreptitious figures who burglarized people's secrets. The term to detect derived from the Latin verb to unroof. This is interesting because the devil, according to legend, allowed his henchmen to peer voyeuristically into houses by removing their roofs. Detectives were known as the devil's disciples. There's a great book called The Devil's Disciples about Hitler's inner circle with Goering and Himmler. And this guy is kind of a Himmler looking character. Um, but that's a great book if you're interested in that era in history. That was one of the main sources for the book that I wrote about megalomania in that certain country in Europe and Imperial Rome. I used Suetonius, Tacitus, and then Richard J. Evans' book about the coming of the Third Reich, and then the Devil's Disciples. That's a good book about that. But and then of course you got the Devil's Chessboard, which is the book about Alan Dulles. That's another great cornerstone book if you're looking for books. People ask me for book recommendations. Well, there you go. Those are some great books. Those are all obviously nonfiction. You should read those books. Um, so it says, but that's interesting about to detect about taking the roof off of the house. I mean, because when he said that, I thought of that image in the movie. Remember the scene in The Witch, the movie, the 2015 movie, The Witch, where the kids are in the barn and they hear the thump on the roof, and you know it's the witch. She's been flying through the air, and that occurs later in the movie because when she goes to the witch's sabbath at the end of the movie, it's like the Goya painting where they're hovering, they're they're flying up into the moonlight, and um she has been completely blackened and sold her soul into illumination. It's the moon's illumination, so that now she can transform and shapeshift like the Scarlet Woman who takes the kid in the movie. But anyway, then remember the next scene is you see the witch in the corner and she's like milking the goat. She's drinking the goat's milk and it's blood. Ugh, sick movie. But this says in 1850, Alan Pinkerton founded the first American private detective agency. In advertisements, the company's motto, "We never sleep," was inscribed under a large, unblinking Masonic like eye, which gave rise to the term private eye. Did you know that's where private eye came from? You guys probably know that, but did you know that that's where it came from? In a manual of general principles and rules that served as a blueprint for the industry, Pinkerton admitted that the detectives must at times depart from the strict line of truth and resort to deception. Yet even many people who despised the profession deemed it a necessary evil. Necessary. Is it necessary? Is it necessary evil? Is it? Is it a necessary evil? As one private eye, it seems that evil is evil, right? And I guess you need the Matthew McConaughey characters in True Detective, right? We're the bad, we're the bad men, right? Or like Orwell says, right? You need rough men to, don't sleep at night so that you can, that quote from Orwell, and then you get, um, what does he say in A Few Good Men? Uh, Men like us sleep. I can't do it, Jack Nicholson. Uh, hold the wall. You need me on that wall. You want me on that wall. Interesting he says that to Tom Coombe, right? I thought I was gonna have Dennis Hopper in this movie. I can't tell the difference between real life and the movies, man. what about my buddy Rip Torn? I thought he was gonna be in this movie. Isn't this movie called The Truth You Can't Handle? Yet even many people who despise the profession deemed it a necessary evil. As one private eye put it, he might be a miserable snake, but he was also the silent, secret, and effective avenger of the outraged majesty of the law when everything else fails. Well, that's pretty cool that they're doing that. Unfortunately, these guys are involved in their own shenanigans, which are tied up, as we see in this book, with the furthering of evil. If it furthers their interests, they have transnational boundaries. They have no loyalties to us, to the state. They are told to that if it's later on, right, they're told that if it's for national security, they can lie under oath. Uh, they have their own set of rules, right, which seem to violate all rules of decent behavior, as the guy says in Apocalypse Now. Hale recruited a brooding private detective from Kansas City who went by the name of Pike. Snaps. Is he a Mr. A. Pike? To preserve his cover, Pike, who smoked a corncob pipe and had a smudge of a mustache, met Hale at a concealed spot near Whiz Bang. That's the city or town. Civic leaders like Hale considered the name Whiz Bang undignified and instead called the town Denoya after a prominent Osage family. As smoke from the oil fields melted into the sky, Hale conferred with Pike. Then Pike slipped away to pursue his investigation. One thing I can't help but notice is that, these oil derricks and the smoke, right, and the arid landscape seems to be hellish and reminds me of a kind of American version of Blake's Dark Satanic Mills, right? But it's out on the open prairie, surrounded by fire, flames, black goo, people with black marble eyes, psychopaths, desperados, people willing to gang stalk and kill their own families, bomb houses. This is not a great place, right? So, let's move on from there. That's the Pinkertons. Just to go back a little, the part about Judge Holden and Touch of Evil that I thought was interesting was this talks about lawmen in the early part of the 20th century, late 19th century. Um, it says lawmen were still largely amateurs. They rarely attended training academies or steeped themselves in the emerging scientific methods of detection, such as the analysis of fingerprints and blood patterns. Frontier lawmen, in particular, were primarily gunfighters and trackers. They were expected to deter crimes and to apprehend a known gunman alive, if possible, dead if necessary. Well, that sounds like what they're supposed to be. People who deter crimes and keep the peace, right? Enforce the law. Well, there's like a million laws, right? And most of them are fake and gray. Instead you had these guys, you know, you had these real ass dudes out there who were taking care of the main bad guys and they didn't worry about you jaywalking as opposed to now or whatever. Hot take. An officer was then literally the law, and nothing but his judgment and his trigger finger stood between him and extermination. The Tulsa Daily World said in 1928, after the death of a veteran lawman who'd worked in the Osage Territory, it was often a case of a lone man against a pack of cunning devils. Because these enforcers received pitiful salaries and were prized for being quick draws, it's not surprising that the boundary between good lawmen and bad lawmen was porous. I mean, that's part of the American mythos, right? That's essentially Tombstone and Doc Holliday. Remember when he deputizes Doc Holliday in the movie? He takes out Johnny Ringo. Poor soul. He was just too high strung. I suppose the strain was more than he could bear. My hypocrisy goes only so far. At least Doc Holliday was a gentleman in that sense and gave that up. Because it says the leader of the Dalton Gang, an infamous 19th century band of outlaws, once served as the main lawman on the Osage Reservation, and they end up doing all this stuff. Then they talk about this guy Harvey M. Freeze, and a 1916 book about the history of Oklahoma described Freeze as a terror to evildoers. This guy sounds like a book I should read. But there were also murmurings that he was cozy with criminal elements. This is the Judge Holden guy. He gave free rein to gamblers and to bootleggers like Kelsey Morrison and Henry Grammer, a rodeo champion who had once served time for murder and who controlled the local distribution of moonshine. One of Grammer's workers later admitted to authorities, I had the assurance that if I was ever arrested, I would be turned out in 5 minutes. A group of citizens from Osage County had previously issued a resolution on behalf of religion, law enforcement, home decency, and morality. That sounds based. Stating that the people who believe a sworn officer of the law should enforce the law are hereby urged to see or write Sheriff Freeze at once and urge upon him to do his sworn duty. instead of messing around with this bad guy. Well, I tie that into Blood Meridian because remember that Judge Holden and his clan, his gang are sanctioned by the U.S. government to go headhunting, right? So they are the good guys who are the devilish bad guy, the Gnostic archons, working in the Blood Meridian and the fiery flames of the inferno of the metallic basin, right, of the West, right, with its black goo underneath. I say metallic basin because there's all sorts of stuff about the metallic basin in the movie and about flint and shining metal. It's supposed to be reminiscent, again, I remember, of Satan lying in adamantine chains in Paradise Lost. Uh, Also, it reminds me of Orson Welles in Touch of Evil, right? The way this guy looks and the way he's described. Um, that makes me think of Philip Seymour Hoffman. I went back and watched. I don't know why I thought of Philip Seymour Hoffman right there, but cheers. I went back and watched the movie Hard Eight, which is uh P.T. Anderson's first movie, I think. And I really wanted to like it, but I could not. The first like quarter of the movie is really good, but honestly, like once um what's his name from Step Brothers like kidnaps the dude, I was like, okay, I'm out. This is kind of lame. I don't get how this story makes sense, like how he would act. I get how it makes sense on the surface, but it seems like a stretch, like they're trying to pull narrative elements together. Honestly, once PSH was out of the movie, I was like, okay, this is obviously the best part of the movie because Philip Seymour Hoffman plays this rogue gambler, right? Give me an eight. Give me an eight. Right. I'm gonna I'm gonna hurt you real bad. I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna find your family real bad. Remember in Mission Impossible 3? Can't do a Philip Seymour. He's hard to do. You know what we need to do in the future? That's a quote. That's a movie quote. I'm gonna hurt you real bad. I can't do it. But that's Philip Seymour Hoffman. I saw a I didn't get to meet him, but Philip Seymour Hoffman was there, and he was the artistic director of the Joe Paps Public Theater in New York. And I have a bust of Apollo up there on the top shelf. I actually bought the bust of Apollo right outside the public theater. Some dude was selling it, and I was like, "Oh, I'll give you a couple bucks for this." And it's a great bust. But anyway, he directed a play that Sam Rockwell was in, that I saw in New York. And Philip Seymour Hoffman was there in the audience, but I didn't get to like meet him or anything. And it was a small audience at the time. R.I.P. PSH. I'm gonna hurt you real bad. I'm gonna find you and then your family. So yeah, we need to do The Talented Mr. Ripley in the future. Would anybody you guys seen that movie? Would you like seeing that movie? Would you like seeing an analysis of that movie? 'Cause it's also a book. I need to do a literary and film analysis of uh what's it called? What's the movie? What did we just mention? The Talented Mr. Ripley, because that's great because again, big oil and big shipping are kind of a part of that, and it's the elites and it's sociopath going around and he's an imposter. I always thought that the idea of the imposter was really preposterous because you go and you say you're this other person, who's gonna believe you? Like, it's like that movie Summersby. Have you seen that movie with Richard Gere? Summersby, Richard Gere shows up after the war, and there's this thing like, is this guy an imposter? Is this not really him? So look, you know, Jodie Foster, your family's been you're the wife, and your husband has been away in the Civil War for a few years, and he comes back, and you don't know if it's the same person. I don't get this. What is this? Also, by the way, um, Holly Hunter should have played Jodie Foster's role in Silence of the Lambs. I'm just putting that out there. I realized that watching the movie Copycat the other day. I know this is going all over the place, but I have a point. Um, so Holly Hunter is in the movie Copycat with Sigourney Weaver and Harry Connick Jr. as He's essentially like the Ted Bundy character because he is communicating with the other serial killers. And remember, Silence of the Lambs is partly based on Ted Bundy because Ted Bundy provided clues as to how to find the Green River Killer, and it turns out he was communicating with all these people. But anyway, um, Holly Hunter should have played that role. She could have played that role with more gravitas, I feel, than Jodie Foster. But whatever, that's just my opinion. But we need to do The Talented Mr. Ripley. That's a good movie. You know, Jude Law is in that, and I told you that story about Jude Law being at my friend's house where they walked out and Jude Law was sitting there, and because he was filming Cold Mountain in Charleston, and he, was at some bar, and then he met some friends of mine afterwards, this is college days, and, they, like, were at a fraternity party or whatever, and then they went back to their house, and, my friend, a girl I know, set up a video camera in the room, like, while they were all just sitting around or whatever, and I've seen the video, it's just Jude Law sitting on a sofa talking or whatever, but one of the guys who lived at the house walked out into the room. He was totally drunk. This guy walked out and they said, Jude Law's here. And he goes, I don't give a fuck. It was really funny. But that was controversial. She owned that videotape because he was uh I don't know, he was hitting on my friend or whatever, and he was married to Sadie Frost at the time. So I don't know, whatever. Huh. It's interesting. Um yeah, so where was I? The Dalton gang. So the Dalton gang is employed. They're seen as, one of the rogue elements there. They're group of organized crime cowboys out there in the Oklahoma territory. And then they actually, it's what I was saying earlier, they get employed by William Hale as part of this thing. Um, let's see. There's a part about they mentioned why it's called Killers of the Flower Moon, which is pretty poetic and interesting. I'll come back to that. It's about well, anyway, I'll get back to that. So the oilmen and John Paul Getty are mentioned on page, let's see, 76 and 77 of this book. And it says the barons came for the auction of the Osage leases, an event that was held about 4 times a year and that was overseen by the Department of the Interior. I mean, I know that's what it is. It is what it is on the surface, but it's just interesting that the Department of the Interior oversees this group of these mega people, these mega oil people. What they're gonna be mega oil people, and Getty is there, um, buying up the land leases, in this territory. So there's a symbiotic relationship, right? And it's what I've just been saying in terms of my thesis for the book. It says one historian dubbed it the Osage Monte Carlo. Since the auctions had begun in 1912, only a portion of Osage County's vast underground reservation had been open to drilling, while the bidding for a single lease, which typically covered a 160-acre tract, had skyrocketed. In 1923, the Daily Oklahoman said, Brewster, the hero of the story, Brewster's Millions, was driven almost to nervous prostration in trying to spend $1 million in 1 year. Had Brewster been in Oklahoma, he could have spent $1 million with just one little nod of the head. $1 million with one nod of the head in like 1912. In good weather, the auctions were held outdoors on a hilltop in Pawhuska in the shade of a large tree known as the $1 million elm. Spectators would come from miles away. Ernest Burkhart, sometimes attended the events, and so did Molly. Molly is the name of his wife. She's going to be the major character in the movie in terms of when the screenplay is written, right? Um, and there's a touch of color in the audiences too, for the Osage Indians often are stoical but uninterested, no, but interested spectators, the Associated Press reported, deploying the usual stereotypes, this guy says. And that's part of his MO for the book, but that obviously does play into their role, into the role of how this all happens. And this says on page 93, oh, another thing that tied into this was when a character named Rowan is killed. And that I couldn't help but think of the original Wicker Man movie. Because remember that the original Wicker Man movie is about the same sort of thing. I mean, that one becomes explicitly a cult because Lord Summerisle owns this island, it's a Scottish island where the major industry there is not oil, but it's these apples. It's the Summer Isle apples, right? And that they've been sacrificing human victims in a kind of J.G. Fraser Golden Bough ritual ceremony, complete with pagan idolatry and satanic fire, in order to secure a good harvest. And so Rowan is the girl that's gone missing that the guy played by Woodward goes to look for. And Rowan is like remember William Faulkner's place is called Rowan Oak, and Rowan has esoteric etymology to it, and it's a like a druidical Celtic tree. And I just thought it was interesting that that movie plays has the same sort of thing that's going on here, right? Where it's essentially, they're not sacrificing people to gain a good harvest, but there is a guy who lords over this place, sacrificing human victims in order to gain ownership of the territory, right? And one of those people is named Rowan. This says after Rowan's death, electric light bulbs began to appear on the outside of Osage houses, what I was mentioning earlier, dangling from rooftops and windowsills and over back doors, their collective glow hollowing the dark. An Oklahoma reporter observed, travel in any direction that you will from Paul Huska, and you will notice at night Osage Indian homes outlined with electric lights, which a stranger in the country might conclude to be an ostentatious display of oil wealth. But the lights are burned, as every Osage knows, as protection against the stealthy approach of a grim specter, an unseen hand that has laid a blight upon the Osage land and converted the broad acres, which other Indian tribes enviously regard as a demi paradise, into a Golgotha and field of dead men's skulls. The perennial question in the Osage land is, who will be next? The murders had created a climate of terror that aided the community. People suspected neighbors, suspected friends. Charles Whitehorn's widow said she was sure that the same parties who had murdered her husband would soon do away with her. A visitor staying in Fairfax later recalled that people were overcome by paralyzing fear, and a reporter observed that a dark cloak of mystery and dread covered the oil bespattered valleys of the Osage Hills. So that those two paragraphs right there, I think, are probably the most revelatory and the best, or the crux of the novel, because they are about how the murders themselves take on all of the aspects and all of the language of an occult ritual murder series. And even though they are motivated by greed, which is not the MO of, or what they say is the MO, or what is the MO in terms of the later serial killer phenomenon, right? In terms of Dave McGowan, which is this post Phoenix program, cult ritual, psychosexual torture um, to destroy God's creation and to further interests that are tied into them, with big government and all these other things, right? Which is the case. But in this, it's the same sort of thing, right? It's just that it's on the surface, it's motivated by greed. But one of the ways they do this is certainly through all of the contacts that these people have, and that's sort of not gone into in the book because that's not his purview in the book. But that seems to be the MO in the book, right, of how these things are accomplished and how they're allowed to get away with it. And my best example for that, for my reason for thinking that, is that on page 109, Chronicle 2, it's the book is interesting because it's put into 3 chronicles. So it's generational chronicles of a group of, a kind of epic story, a saga of these people, um, in the United States. That's interesting because we just did, American Gods, which sort of tries to be a chronicle, and then we're gonna do the Icelandic sagas, and, we'll talk about the Eddas as part of that. But, but it says here on page 109 at the start of Chronicle 2, it's called The Evidence Man, and this is about the second section of the book is all about this guy White, not Walter White, but, this guy White, who was the guy who figured all this out. And, the epigraph here is from, guess what? I love this. The epigraph is from our guy, Don DeLeo. That's how I say his name if you're new here. And from the book Libra, which we've covered here. That was one of our, that's one of my favorite analyses that we've done. Go back, please go back and watch my Don DeLeo analysis of Libra because it's the conspiratorial elements involved in the in the not J. Edgar Hoover, Lee Harvey Oswald and the big JFK event, and it's looked at through a sort of a postmodern prism. I mean, it's kind of an arm of that, right? The epigraph here says, and we've covered this, says a conspiracy is everything that ordinary life is not. It's the inside game, cold, sure, undistracted, forever closed off to us. We are the flawed ones, the innocents, trying to make some rough sense of the daily jostle. Conspirators have a logic and a daring beyond our reach. All conspiracies are the same taut story of men who find coherence in some criminal act. It's a wilderness of mirrors, right? In the cathedral of the conspiracy of silence and the cathedral of intelligence that he discusses in the book. Great epigraph there and is perfect for this book. And of course, this is why we read literature because it takes a great author to write in a poetic fashion in a work of prose to synthesize truly what a conspiracy is in terms of its almost spiritual purpose, right? Um, and again, another he mentions the conspiracy and the hidden design. Earlier, remember he mentioned the hidden hand. I read that in those two paragraphs. It was as if some hidden hand showed the grim specter of death. Well, the hidden hand is a Masonic element, Masonic term, right? And he says, um, the files on the murders of the Osage contain history in its rawest form, bits of data vacuumed up without any chronology or narrative, like a novel whose pages were out of order. Almost like a cut up method, like a William Burroughs, David Bowie cut up method, or like postmodernism is in that's what we've covered in so many works on postmodernism is a chaotic landscape of literature in the wasteland in the Valley of Ashes and the DeLeo paradigm of which becomes Ordo al Caio for the people involved in the conspiracy. And um, he says on the next page, a few details of the files seem telling. Repeat killers tend to rigidly adhere to a routine, yet the Osage murders were carried out in a bewildering array of methods. There was no signature. We mentioned that earlier. This, along with the fact that bodies turned up in different parts of the state and country, suggested that this was not the work of a single killer. Instead, whoever was behind the crimes must have employed henchmen. The nature of the murders almost gave some insight into the mastermind. The person was not an impulsive killer, but a connoisseur of plots who was was intelligent enough to understand toxic substances and calculating enough to carry out his diabolical vision over the years. Turns out, also one of the connections that the guy drew in the way that this guy White, the Texas Ranger turned cowboy turned lawman turned prison warden, was able to put all this together was that he knew that Hale had grown up as a cattle rustler with I think with the Dalton gang. So he had connections it's in the underworld and in the legitimate world, in the business world, and in the big corners of the burgeoning United States in the beginning of the modernist era in the 20th century in America that allowed him to thrive. It allowed him to practice his psychopathy. Um, Also, there's a great quote from Julius Caesar here. We've covered Julius Caesar on page 174. It says White couldn't, this is the end of the section. White couldn't determine whether Ernest's marriage to Molly 4 years before Anna's murder had been conceived from the outset as part of the plot, or if Hale had prevailed upon his nephew to betray her after they married. In either case, the plan was so brazen, so sinister, that it was hard to fathom. It demanded that Ernest share a bed with Molly and raise children with her, all while plotting and scheming against her family. As Shakespeare wrote in Julius Caesar, this is Brutus, Act 2, Scene 1. Where wilt thou find a cavern dark enough to mask thy monstrous visage? Seek none, conspiracy. Hide it in smiles and affability. There is no one better. There is no one better at talking about conspiracies and hiding in plain sight, right? Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it, says Lady Macbeth. Than Shakespeare. The key to all understanding of conspiracy, at least in terms of literature or in the canon, is through Shakespeare. This is a picture of Burkhart and his wife. That's the guy who was involved. He was going to put his family in the house that was bombed, and he was an associate of Hale. That's the guy who's going to be played by Leo in the film. And get this, when Hale, here's my final kind of proof or evidence within the text to say that this is how Hale was able to establish himself and able to get through as long as he did, and even to get out of jail in 20 years. It makes a note a couple of times of the fact that he wore a perfectly pressed suit, shoes shined to a gleam, a felt hat, and an overcoat with his diamond-studded Masonic Lodge pin fastened to the lapel. "Understand I'm wanted," he said, explaining that he was there to turn himself in. "No need to put the fellas out." As he was taken to the jail in Guthrie, he was confronted by a local reporter. Hale's deep-set eyes burned, and he moved, in the words of the reporter, like a leashed animal. Okay, so when the guy's eyes look like they're burning and he's moving like a leashed animal and he turns himself in because he's trying to do them a favor, and this guy has ties to all these people. Look at this guy. Look at this guy. Now look, I know that on the surface this looks like any other accountant or whatever. But I guess maybe it's just in with the knowledge of hindsight that we're able to go, no, this guy looks like a monster. But I feel like this guy looks like every other soy Gumby man, right? Chicken neck ninny who has this do-gooder thing on the surface and wears a human skin suit, right? One of the things that he says in the interview, this is a dead giveaway. Dead giveaway. You remember that song? Dead giveaway. Dead giveaway. That was after the Ariel Castro event, that creeper who locked the guys up. Dead giveaway. Dead giveaway. One dead giveaway is in the interview. It says, hoping Hale might at least talk about himself. The reporter asked, "How old are you?" "I'm 51 years of age." This guy's 51? Right. Um, I guess maybe his soul is rotting his lizard skin or whatever. "How long have you been in Oklahoma?" 25 years, more or less. "You're pretty well known, aren't you?" "I'm kind of a big deal." He doesn't say that. He says, "I think so." "Have large numbers of friends?" "I hope so." "That's all fine." "Wouldn't they like to have a statement from you, even though you merely say, 'I'm innocent'?" "I try my case in the courts, not in newspapers. Cold tonight, isn't it?" The fuck? Like I just said that. That right there seems to me to be the one. I mean, and I'm not like psychoanalyzing the guy. I'm saying it seems like any of us ask for our opinion, and this is the guy, right? The 27 people have been murdered in this town that you have all these interests in. You're the cattle baron. You own the biggest mansion. Your people married into these families. You get all the insurance, and you're there turning yourself in or whatever because you're there to be questioned because you're innocent, right? You're probably there to gaslight the people questioning you. You're gonna just rub it in their face, and then they're saying, "Oh, you have lots of friends." And what does he say? He says, "Cold tonight, isn't it?" That to me is so weird. That's it. That's the guy right there. All this shit is going on, and you try to distract the conversation by talking about the damn weather. It's cold tonight. That is so bizarre. Am I making too much of this? I mean, I can't be because that's the reason why I put it in the book. I mean, what's great about the book, by the way, is that when I talk about show versus tell, this book is a great example of how, yes, he's telling a story, but he doesn't need to tell us, the reader, that that is a weird detail. He just shows us what the guy said, right? He gives us a direct quote. There doesn't seem to be any editorializing about it. There's no sort of opinion. It's just, it's just, it's just frankly bizarre. I think that he would say that. Give me a second. I'm going to get another cigarette. Be right back, folks. I'll be right back. Cold tonight, isn't it? Well, it is quite nippy. It is quite unusually nippy outside. Hmm. So yeah, bizarre. Really, really bizarre. Um, bizarre detail. Shouts out to everybody out there, please. Again, if you haven't, hit that like button, hit that share button. Let me pack the old cowboy killers here. Huh, cowboy killers. Oh, dang, that's what's happening in the book. That's crazy. Again, if you want to read further about oil, it seems like it would be dry. It is fairly dry reading, but this book is pretty amazing. I mean, this is The Prize by Daniel Jurgen, and this is like mainline. I mean, this is um, mainline history about all things oil. I mean, I just opened up to the opened up to the opened up to page 217, and my note here is John D. Rock Jr. cover total degenerate. Um, and then on the other page, it talks about Doheny was judged innocent and never went to jail, leading one senator to complain, "You can't convict $1 million in the United States." Well, that seems to be the truth. Um, this part talks about Hussein and the sheikh in Monaco. This is a good book. You should check this book out. I mean, it's like a this book is like a 800 something page, uh, enormous piece. But again, a better book than that, probably about oil, big oil, and how it gives its liquid tentacles into the elites and provides a uh, a perfect sort of organizational structure that specter like, octopus like reaches its way into the lives of every human being is this book right here, The House of Getty by Russell Miller. Yeah, I read this in 2017. Getty is a fascinating character. And John Paul Getty, and then of course, with the kidnappings and all that stuff. Pretty interesting character. Is one of the guys that really um his remember his parties. His parties were like he has some of the eyes wide shut parties. Just unfathomable wealth. And I think Hale saw himself as one of these guys, at least he wanted to be. But what you see is that this book is also a great example of how the different levels of the pyramid show you that you think it's one thing, and then it's something bigger, and then it's something bigger, and then it's something bigger, and then it's Hale, and then Hale is subject to these oil guys, and then there's this other guy who's a banker, and it just keeps going up in levels, right? Um, please, oh, Jethro thought I was talking about Geddy Lee from Rush. So yeah, we're starting to wind our way down here. Please, if you want me to check out your super chats, you can send in super chats through the super chat function. I really, really appreciate sending super chats in through again through PayPal. Shouts out to Jason again for that $5 super chat through PayPal. Really appreciate Jason who always supports us. Um, shouts out to Buster who dropped a $10 super chat on Venmo. Shouts out to our homegirl Kristen, who sent $5. Our homegirl, Slowboy Whiteboard, through Cash App. She says, "Thanks for the stream, Kang." Well, thank you so much, Wayne. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Ray, who sends $5 on Cash App. Thank you so much. That helps me. That helps me out incredibly. Yes, you can also send money through the Dono chat. And again, let's see. Shouts out to Adam for semi-sponsoring the stream. Shouts out to my sis out there who supports me and supports the stream. Love you, to my sister. Shouts out to Max also who dropped a $10 Venmo. I think on the last one. I don't know if I got to that one because it was after the stream. Shouts out to Joe out there who dropped $20 after that last stream. And Jason always supports us. So please, please get those super chats in. And again, if you would like me to cover a book or to cover an author, it's better yet if you want me to cover an author, or a theme, please send me $100 through PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo, and give me a list of things you want me to cover. I'll get to them. I'll try to get to them in a timely fashion. I mean, we got a lot going on, but I'll get to them. Again, I might not have your opinion, your same opinion about the works, and it's up to me what to cover and what not to cover for the channel. But you can give me a list of stuff, and I will see what I think about it. And we've covered all the. We still got like a couple other ones. We got Ben Franklin and Boccaccio and a couple other things to cover for the stream. We also got Fire Sale. If you want me to cover a movie, drop a fat chat, and I will cover some movies for you. We got a bunch of movies coming out. I definitely will be covering Oppenheimer and Barbie when they come out this summer as a double bill, probably. I may even get some of my friends to help me cover those and just have a sort of general conversational analysis about those. So, let's see. Enfant Terrible says, "I'm interested in sponsoring a stream soon. Do you cover films, TV shows?" Yes, of course. I cover lots of films here. Go see my playlist. I have lots of films covered. That's probably my most voluminous playlist where I covered films based in literature. If not that, then I will do the screenplay and cover it as a literary work. Um, Fire Sale. So, um, yes, please don't think about it. Just do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Just Fire Sale. Yeah, give me a list of movies or TV shows. It depends on the TV shows. But yeah, give me some TV shows. Oh, speaking of TV shows, another tangent here. Okay, but this is has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But why not? We're on the internet. So one of the shows that's huge now, by the way, or this was a big premiere this week, and it's huge in terms of its significance for what we cover in our circles here, is the TV show, The Idol on HBO. They have 1 episode out, and I was blown away by this. I could not believe that I was watching this. It was ridiculous. So, The Idol stars Jonathan Depp's daughter, Lily Rose Depp, as a kind of, she's a pop star. She's like a sort of Miley, Britney pop star, and there's a lot of Britney elements in it. And she's gone through some sort of psychiatric break. She's trying to make her kind of not really comeback, but make a new song. And it's also this is very Hollywood. It's got all the Hollywood elements, including the ones that are up to date, and a lot of the language from now that's up to date, especially in terms of Me Too and all that stuff. Involved in it. But it's interesting seeing the back and forth. Eli Roth is in it. What's his name? The singer who did I Just Wanna Go Back to 1990. Troye Sivan, the guy who's Charlie XCX's friend. Love Charlie XCX. He's in it. But the main character besides Jonathan Depp's daughter is The Weeknd. And he's got this soundtrack out, which I talked about in the last stream, where it's this song Popular with Madonna and Playboy Cardi. And the lyrics are, she'd do anything to be popular, um, kill anyone to be popular, sell her soul to be popular. And the show reminds me, it looks like it's a Nicholas Winding Refn show. Like it looks a lot like Neon Demon. There's a lot of Neon Demon elements in it. And The Weeknd plays a kind of guru Hollywood dark force cult guy who owns a club, and he provides this sort of he's gonna be the other half of the Gnostic union with Lily Rose Depp. That's what I know the show's gonna be like that. And there's a scene at the end of the first episode where he's trying to tell her how people will believe her in terms of her songs. Now that part, what's interesting about the show is so far, the part that is interesting, the reason I think it's well done, even though it's a dark show, it's dark material, is that he says a lot of the things that I said in the lyric streams that we talked about when we did the music lyrics, and we just did Bob Dylan. And some of those are that when the singer sings, they have to sing around the words. They don't sing on the words like a metronome. You have to, I guess a good slightly cringy but esoteric way of understanding it is great singers own the words in the song. They own the lyrics. So so when they are singing something, the audience, and we often don't think about this because we just listen to pop music or whatever, but the audience has to believe that the singer is singing the truth, that it's them, that they said it and they lived it, right? Because otherwise, the songs don't work. Even the synthetic songs, and I love synths, but I'm talking about synthetic in general, like synthetic pop songs that sound like they were written by a committee, which they can be. Remember Under the Silver Lake? Um, uh, even those songs have to be performed through this character as if the singer is the muse and the singer united into one. You have to believe what the singer's saying, and that's why it works. Now, this ends up being dark, obviously, and especially in terms of the TV show, because he does this thing where he drapes her in scarlet, so she becomes the Scarlet Woman, and then he cuts a hole in her mouth, so now she's breathing through a veil. So he's pierced the veil. So now she's going to go to the other side, right? And it's going to be a dark show. But, that's an interesting show, and I could not believe some of I mean, even the very first 30 seconds of the show, I was like, "This is crazy." I think it was, the show is produced or, whatever by the guy who did Euphoria. I've never seen Euphoria. I know what it is, and I know that it's like that's what the show is, but, you know, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience probably won't be interested in watching the show, and that's fine. But, so a lot of people, for the, rightly so, find it hard to watch this stuff. I think it's interesting because it is revelatory. Somebody's got to watch it and analyze it and talk about it. And of course, a lot of our friends do that. They are the best at that. But I will, if you want me to keep going with that show and you want me to take it episode by episode, even, then let me know. And you can also write me emails at madmaximalism with two X's.com or at gmail.com, madmaximalism with two X's at gmail.com. Okay. So, just to kind of wrap it up here, um, on page 234, the prosecution rested and the defense soon summoned Hale to the stand, addressing the jurors as gentlemen. He insisted, "I never devised a scheme to have Rowan killed, also never devised his death." Although Hale made a compelling witness, White was confident the government had proven its case. In addition to Burkhart's testimony, White had testified to Ramsey's confession, and witnesses had described Hale's fraudulent acquisition of the insurance policy. The prosecutor, Roy St. Louis, called Hale the ruthless freebooter of death. Another prosecutor said the richest tribe of Indians on the globe has become the illegitimate prey of white men. The Indian is going. A great principle is involved in this case. People of the United States are following us through the press. The time has now come for you gentlemen to do your part. So that speech comes at a time where the power structure has to make a decision, and they have to make a decision that's like there's too much stuff here, I guess, and this has got to be the guy that's taken down. Now there can be all sorts of elements in that, blackmail elements, right? It's there's too much truth to be able to hide it, or it becomes a limited hangout. Nevertheless, that's what happens in the case, and I think that's an interesting statement by the prosecutor at the time. The jury is getting death threats. One person gets a note passed to him that says, "I will kill you." Um, and I wrote, "This is interesting because it makes blatantly clear the justice system is corruptible then, as if it's any less so now." Also, they go into great detail about the frontline heroes who poison these people. Um, Ernest Burkhart is pardoned and released. Um, Ted Turner owns like a gigantic swath of land where the Osage are to this day. Um, her father, Molly, has a daughter. It just says Margie then mentioned something I had not seen in any of the records. Her father had told her that on the night of the explosion, he and his sister and Molly had been planning to spend the night at the Smith's house. But Cowboy had a bad earache, and they stayed home. That's why they escaped, Margie said. It was just fate. It took a moment for the implications to sink in. My dad had to live knowing that his father had tried to kill him. It's not fate. It's not fate, which is one of the mistakes made especially in terms of the editorializing and the narrative structure of the novel. It's not fate. These are people making active decisions to do evil in a fallen world. Um, a case not closed. History is a merciless judge. It lays bare our tragic blunders and foolish missteps and exposes our most intimate secrets, wielding the power of hindsight like an arrogant detective who seems to know the end of the mystery from the outset. I said, this is a bad sentence and simile. It's too obvious. He's telling us here, and also the analogy doesn't work. It seems almost like a mixed metaphor. Um, uh, Hale relied on others to do his bloodletting, and the banker who's caught is this guy Vaughn, W. Vaughn. Um, and it really is no, it was this guy H.G. Burt, but Vaughn is one of the killers. Burt is the president of a bank. He's one of the guys who's on another level than Hale. And it's interesting because it takes this guy, this journalist, to figure this out in here. What does House of Getty have to say? What does House of Getty have to say about the Osage? Well, on page um on page 19, this talks about how in December 1903, the Minnesota Oil Company named Minnie for Minnesota and Homa for Oklahoma struck oil on Lot 50 at 1,400 feet. The well came in as a gusher and settled down to the steady production of 100 barrels a day, making George Getty an instant oil magnate. He was naturally delighted and decided to take his wife and son to Bartlesville in the new year so they could watch the second well being drilled. Young Paul could scarcely contain his excitement when his father told him about the projected visit to Indian Territory. Every day he asked when he would be leaving. Even playing games of cowboys and Indians with his friends seemed faintly pointless when, as he told them, he would soon be rubbing shoulders with real cowboys and real Indians. And then they strike it rich even more so. On page 39, it talks about how, let's see, the population of Tulsa tripled in the 3 years following the discovery of the Cushing Pool. Once again, once just a ford across the Arkansas River, by 1914, Tulsa boasted 11 hotels, 8 jewelers, 84 law firms, and 126 oil prospecting companies. Among them, the Minnesota Oil Company, which opened a small field office in rooms 1016 and 1017 in the R.T. Daniel Building, one of several new office blocks in the town. Um, and it just booms. It booms. And from there, it sort of fans out. This becomes New York money, and then it becomes global money. Will and Bud Carter, the brothers who sold George Getty the lease on Lot 50, hung around the lobby frequently, as did Colonel Wood, oil reporter for the Tulsa World, for it was not only the best source of stories, but also the first place to hear of a new strike. Um, some Osage families had incomes in excess of $65,000 a year, and they became notorious for buying new Cadillacs or Pierce Arrows, driving them until they broke down and abandoning them at the roadside. Ornate, decorated hearses were also very popular, and it was not unusual to see a hearse careering across the prairie with an Indian at the wheel and the family cheerfully bouncing in the coffin compartments at the rear. And then, yeah, 4 towns popped up. Um, let's see. I wrote Oklahoma becomes the foundry and foundation of the entire Getty fortune because 1920 ushered in by the Oklahoma Field's most dramatic spectacle to date. On New Year's Eve, the Minnesota Oil Company was drilling a routine hole on a lease at Lookout Hill in Osage Territory. As the winter sun dipped below the horizon, Harley Robinson, the driller, scrawled in the log that the drill had penetrated 50 feet into Mississippi lime, struck at 2295 feet. Oil was already seeping up out of the hole at each turn of the screws, and Robinson reckoned the well looked good for 200 barrels a day, if not more. Suddenly, the pitch of the drilling engine changed noticeably, and the wire rope leading into the hole slackened. "Throw on the tug ropes, Roy," Harley shouted. "Something has broke loose down in this hole." And then pretty soon they start running for their lives. You know what this is? This is these people saying, like Daniel Plainview in oh, I'm going red here. I hope you guys are still reading me. You still reading me here? You still read me? You still getting a good sig here? Let me check. Because it says I'm redlining. There we go. Stream is healthy. Okay. So, yeah, this is Daniel Plainview, Daniel Day Lewis. In this, why is that? Okay, that's weird. This is Daniel Plainview. For real life, saying, "Hey, drink your shake." That's what the Gettys are doing. The Gettys are drinking the milkshake of the Osage, right? Finally on page 55, the final mention of the Osage, it says the Oil and Gas Journal chose to pay its lavish tribute for the success of the operation to Minnehoma's founder, George F. Getty of Los Angeles is the man who tamed the oil wildcat in its native lair in several Oklahoma districts. He has a record of having drilled 40 wells in succession without pulling a blank in the entire list. His energy and good luck are what put the get in Getty. In the course of events, he drilled a hole in the scenery over in Osage country, which on New Year's Day started off at the rollicking rate of something like 20,000 barrels daily. 20,000 barrels daily in Osage. The rush of oil and gas from the depths tossed the tools out of the hole and turned loose a deluge of petroleum. And Brothers Getty have been receiving congratulations by wire and otherwise, wishing him many happy returns of the day. Anybody who can figure oil at 275 a barrel can readily ascertain just what the said returns amount to, approximately 20,000 barrels a day at $2.75 a barrel, um, every day, right? In the early part of the 20th century. So the Gettys they go over to sod territory, and they say, "Look," they have geologists, and they say, "Look, this place looks like it has oil." And they're like, "All right, we'll sell it to you for cheap." So Getty makes these small concessions, ends up owning all this oil, and owns he mines the blood of the earth, just like this guy Hale is sacrificing the blood of the subsurface earth, this tribe, so that he can continue his reign of through in his reign of terror, so that he can continue his role as one of the functionaries in the pyramid system, right? And running literal pyramid schemes through this village, through this town, where these people are the victims of this awful psychopathy. So that is um that is about it. I think that'll do it for Killers of the Flower Moon. And you know, I, I just will be interested to see the movie because I know you just know. Oh, I'm freezing up a little bit here. I know I'm redlining. If you can still hear me, I know it's just the internet, and I know that the movie is going to probably take on a different spin. Remember Leo did that movie a few years ago, which obviously this ties into Greta territory, right? And it's interesting that Leo made the movie a few years ago, which is all about Canada and the Earth and all that stuff. And then now I'm living down here in the dang haze, right, from the uh the DEW flames that have been set in Canada. I don't know what's going on. But I will say, I don't know if you guys are subject to this fire haze that's going over. I know that in Virginia they also had like landfill fires, and that's contributing to the smoke and the haze. I mean, honestly, it doesn't affect me at all. Um, but I can smell smoke. I can smell smoke everywhere I go, and it's a different kind of smoke. It's not cigarette smoke, so I can smell it. And you know, but it doesn't affect me like it's affecting other people, I guess. Maybe I'm just all hard up on the inside. But, but I will say that I am used to it in a way because when I lived in Malaysia for a summer, um, one of the reasons that I left was because all of a sudden I went out of my flat one day and I was walking to work, and I remember I went over there to act in this a TV show, and it ended up we didn't move to Shanghai. We went to Malaysia, and then I was teaching English or whatever. Anyway, so I walked out of the house and like I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me, and it was smoky, and I was like, all right, something on fire. And then I kind of made my way to the university, and when I got there, I asked them about it. What is this, dude? And they were like, "Oh, no, that's just the smoke." Because every year, apparently in Malaysia, they plan burn parts of the rainforest in Indonesia, and the smoke drifts over the Straits of Malacca over, and it engulfs Malaysia, especially KL, in this it's just smoke. Everything's smoke. You can't see anything. Nobody can breathe. That's the first time I remember wearing the MASQUE like they do in Japan because like it was so bad. I mean, you couldn't go outside. And so that was also, looking back on it, that's part of, some sort of satellite system of the globalist operation that serves to keep people inside. I mean, it also was part of logging industry and all that stuff. But it was crazy. So that is the first thing that I thought of when I walked outside 2 days ago and I saw the haze. There's a particular like texture to the way that the sky looks when it's filled with smoke like that. I can't describe it. I mean, I know you see it because if you guys are in that, if you're anywhere like in the South or on the East Coast like I am, but I can't describe it in any other way than like that I was used to it because of Malaysia, and it's something I'll never forget. There's a certain light in the sky, and there's a certain like texture to the smoke, and there's a sheen that you get, just like the sheen of the oil rising on the wells in Osage, which is a kind of a little rainbow sheen. And this is like a, I mean, it looks like a nuclear sunset. It looks like a toxic airborne event in white noise, and I would suspect that I don't know, what's happening or what they say, and you look at everything with discernment, but it does seem that things seem to have happened at the same time. We remember what happened in Australia a few years ago, and that I just think that that was DEWs that they were using to move parts of the real estate and to corral people into pod cities, and just as an overall statement, right? Because that was also tied in with stabbies and everything else that was happening at the time, and that seems to make logical sense. I mean, remember when that was happening in out west and all that, and they caught the people doing that, uh, or at least they suspected they caught them. I don't know. Um, but that seems to play into this. So whether it's an organic event or not, you know, we did have a big heat storm here, and it's hurricane season, so maybe that'll knock out um, some of that stuff that's going on, and dampen it a little bit. But it seems to be, I'm putting on my hat again. I like wearing my hat. That seems to be a little bit of what's happening. So who knows? But I hope everybody is well out there. Thank you for being here. Please, if you're watching this on the replay, please go back and watch the replay or catch parts on the replay. We were doing pretty well here. We are, and please like the stream. You can support me at any time. Again, you can hit those links in the channel description and the video descriptions. You can support me. You can drop dono chat. You can do Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. Um, you can sponsor a stream, which I'm happy to do. We love the content here. And you can catch me. The plan is tomorrow night. I'm gonna drop this, Maddie. Plan is tomorrow night. Maddie is doing a stream on his channel at Digital Minefield, and he's gonna cover some stuff. And I might show up for that one because he's my homeboy. So I'm looking forward to that. And also, maybe we'll have Boiler Room tomorrow night on Alternate Current Radio and on Rockfin. Shouts out to our friends out there, Hesher, Ruckus, Grunt, and Spore, and all them. If you didn't watch it last week, please go to the Alternate Current Radio or Boiler Room Rockfin. You can find it very easily, and it's in my last video description. Jay showed up for a little bit, for a while. That was cool. And also, I will be doing the spot tomorrow night, at tomorrow late afternoon at 5:40 p.m. Eastern time on TNT Radio Live with Hesher and them, and we'll be talking about current events and literature and whatever else we got to talk about. So shouts out to Hesher out there. So again, please check me out on TNT Radio Live tomorrow at 5:40 Eastern time, and also Digital Minefield tomorrow night. We'll be back next time again with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Kenkeezy, Kenkeezy, and we got a bunch of works lined up for the future. So again, thank you so much for being here. And once again, also shouts out to last shouts out. Shouts out to iPack Arts for doing our thumbnails. Great artist. He also does Jay and Sam Tripoli, and he is a great guy. You can contact him on Instagram, ipack.arts at Instagram. And also our homeboy Rooks G, ROXG, who does the awesome jungle drum and bass music, the banging music, our intro and exit music. So please go to YouTube and follow him. Check him out on SoundCloud, all of his links, Instagram. So to play us out, here's Rooks G, and cut off his new album. This is Hyper City Dash 2097. Our homeboy Rooks G. Check it, check it, check it, check it. Here he comes.